Okay, so if you started reading the dialectics of nature, you probably noticed that there is a lot of physics talk, a little bit of chemistry talk as well. So it may not be as entertaining for many people as it may be to the people who actually understand physics and chemistry a little bit. But nonetheless, I still do believe that we should be reading such works, even if we don't know enough about certain fields of study, because the dialectical principles, this is the beauty of them, they apply universally. They apply not only to sciences, they apply to everything. They apply to the movement of the matter or the movement of the substance. So this is what we all want to start to employ in our day-to-day lives. And the analysis of personal is also the analysis of the collective, because the personal doesn't exist outside of the collective. The analysis of the singular is always the analysis of the whole. Now, that does not mean that it's going to be exactly the same. It's going to be a different scale. It's going to be a different quantity, but the quality is what we're looking for, right? And if you want to simplify some of these principles, it is the understanding of the world as if it's not a zero-sum game, first and foremost, because in a lot of the modern hateful ideologies, including the overarching capitalist narrative, we believe in the zero-sum game. We believe that if somebody gains something, then we must lose something. So a lot of the anti-narratives that nowadays exist are all based off of that. Now, we have to understand that it may appear so on the surface, but when you start looking for the contradiction, this is when things begin to fall into place. Because if you look at the interests of yourself and the interests of your neighbors, when you look at the interests of your co-workers, this is when you realize that we all have the same interests, right? Our material interests are very, very similar, and we're unable to meet our material needs, and we're not able to meet our goals, material goals, not because of some inherent human qualities that we may or may not possess, but because of the inherent contradiction of the public production and private consumption. This is the key contradiction of capitalism. We produce everything together, yet there are only a few people who get to decide what to do with the fruits of the labor, and the people who get to distribute the fruits of common labor. And again, the other second aspect of the dialectical logic in everyday life that we all should start employing is the hierarchy games and the who's more important games, because they again fall into the grander narrative of the zero-sum game. Why does the doctor have to earn the same amount as somebody who sweeps the streets in the morning? Now, again, both of these are socially necessary. We need the labor of both people. Now, of course, an argument can be made that machines can do the sweeping. Another argument can be made that some surgical procedures can be also done by machines. But as long as human labor is involved, socially necessary human labor is going to necessarily dictate its own material compensation. That does not mean that a doctor and a person who sweeps the streets are going to receive the exact same wages. For example, if we're talking about commodity production still, it means that they're going to receive so that they can reproduce their labor. Now, if a person who sweeps the streets cannot afford to live, then there won't be people who sweep the streets. Now, does it mean we should discriminate against the people who sweep the streets? No. Does it mean that they should be hailed as some kind of royalty? Again, no. Nobody should be hailed as royalty, because there is no use, simply put. There is no pragmatic use. Respect and connection can be established using different means and not empty comparisons, but I digress. So when we talk about public production and private consumption, when we talk about the weird distribution systems that we nowadays have, this is the core contradiction of capitalism, and understanding how the vast majority of the substance moves in such a way where the force and the anti-force, so to speak, the power and the anti-power, they're a part of the same process. So one cannot be separated from the other. Same goes for the slave-master dichotomy, which I keep on referring to, which really should open our eyes to the fact that we do not want to become the masters. We want to create such conditions where there isn't going to be a need for a master. There isn't going to be some kind of a motive for people to become a master, where the master is going to dissipate. So we cannot get rid of slavery if we cannot get rid of the masters, and vice versa. So these two are mutually dependent. And this hierarchy that is built into this dichotomy, this is imposed, right? The hierarchy, just like any kind of a morality evaluation, this is all imposed later. It's all a part of the ideology. Now, the master is just as big of a victim and as big of a slave to his own biases and to his own illusions as the slave. Does that mean the master materially suffers just as much as the slave does? No. So again, we're not going to equate the two, but what we're going to see them as different sides of the same process. The process being commodity production, right? So the commodity production, when goods and products are created for sale, for trade, for barter, this system requires certain types of ideological and moral justifications, and it also requires its own replication, right? So in order to stop replicating such schemas and such ways of being, we have to stop reproducing it. But to stop reproducing it, we have to understand what it is in its totality. And that is a big issue nowadays, because there's so many red herrings being thrown our way. If we are interested in socialism and communism, or if we are just interested in survival, there's so many distractions that are thrown our way that really make us lose sight of a bigger picture. It isn't about social reform, okay? It isn't about better life for everyone, because commodity production creates the slave-master dichotomy. Even if you're not a slave to your boss, even if you work for yourself and you're an entrepreneur, you are still not out of the system. Even if you're an independent farmer who has their own plot of land, who is able to provide for themselves, you are still not free. Because not only because you still depend on certain products and certain things like medication, etc., because most of the people are not going to be able to create their own medication and remedy all kinds of illnesses, etc., but you're also still an ideological subject of the system, because you still may view the world in these dichotomies, in these formal logic type of narratives, where if you're one, you're not the other, and where you're still driven by the same type of production motives. You are still interested in gaining more surplus value, even if it is from your own labor, and you may become a slave to your own fancies and whims. And this does happen to a lot of the people who are moderately successful with a certain business, for example. They may view themselves as not partaking in this whole capitalist chase. They feel like they won the lottery and now they're good. They don't have to worry about capitalism anymore. Of course, this is petite bourgeoisie type of an ideology. It's also a part of the bigger capitalist ideology still. But moreover, it is still not true. It is still not true. Nobody in this world, in the human world, can be outside of the bigger whole being humanity. Because if you are human, then you are of mankind. You cannot all of a sudden become some different enlightened species. And all of this thoughts about how some people feel like they have escaped capitalism, this is delusion. People like to soothe themselves by thinking that they're not a part of, a consumerist rampage that's happening everywhere. They're not a part of the mob, of the crowd. Yes, you are. Everyone, myself included, we're all a part of this. So we cannot escape individually. That's just impossible. Looking for a contradiction, looking for a true contradiction, kind of like in the slave-master dichotomy, kind of like in the collective production, individual consumption type of dichotomies. This is what's going to help us train ourselves to not fall for simple formal logic. Of course, formal logic has its place, just as I said before, but it is very limiting. It is a very limiting framework. Dialectical framework, on the other hand, provides us the tools to be able to predict future trends and tendencies. We're not going to be able to predict exactly what's going to happen. We're not going to possess some magical powers, no. But what we're going to be able to do is that we're going to be able to see the relativity. We will see the cause and effect a little bit more clearly if we follow the main laws of dialectics. And this is why I highly recommend you still read the Dialectics of Nature by Engels, even if you're really not into chemistry or physics, especially in the historical forms of chemistry and physics. I still highly recommend you read them, because you still are going to be able to crystallize some of those concepts. And if you train yourself to look at the world not in the binary way, not in the black or white way, but in the way where you look at the processes, you look at the development, you look at the becoming of things, then you're going to have a much easier time just living your life and deciding what it is to do, even on individual level. And you will also be able to organize more successfully with other people, and you're not going to be as surprised by certain happenings as otherwise you may be. So let me know what you think. Hopefully it all made sense. Consider supporting me on Patreon. Do take care of yourself and your community first. Subscribe to me on all the other social medias, even though I don't do much there, and I'll talk to you sometime later.